Hi there. My name's John Russell, and I'm a partner at Crypto.com Capital. Very excited to be joined by Mr. Yat Siu. I'm sorry, I probably butchered the pronunciation of your name, Yat. So please correct me if I'm wrong. But
no, that's just
I think you're well known for being the CEO. Actually,
Chairman.
are you the CEO? So chairman of
yes.
Animoca Brands. So essentially the head chief, the head boss at Animoca Brands. So very excited to be joining you today to talk all things Animoca Brands and beyond. So thanks so much.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
So if I may, I will start with a question which I think for myself I'm quite curious about, because I think this the answer that you'll give will say a lot about sort of culture and the history of Animoca Brands. So you guys are one of the first sort of tech companies to publicly list in Australia. So ASX, I know in the previous decade, right, went after a lot of tech companies, especially in Southeast Asia and Asia, right, because people had raised capital. I guess getting an exit was kind of hard then, right? So you guys went public, I think 2015-ish.
Yeah, it started in 2014, right? But 2015 we went public. That's right.
Okay, yeah. So you listed, but obviously fast forward to March 2020, sorry. And you guys left ASX, right? And as I understand it, the valuation of the business, given the based on the share price you guys had, was around about 120 million USD, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And earlier this month, you guys raised 110 million dollars at a valuation of almost 6 billion, right? So what on earth has happened in that period? So that's not a long time. That's like what, 2.5 years ish, I guess. So your company valuation has gone from 120 million to 6 billion. Can you talk us through sort of the details of how you went from?
Of course. So there's a lot of history there, but I think we also have to look at the macro of the market as well, right? So sure. I think the very first thing to consider is that when we went public on the Australian Stock Exchange, and just so you know, we didn't leave; we were unceremoniously booted off the exchange. The main reason we were asked, basically we were not asked, we were basically forced to leave, was because of the fact that we were very active in crypto. And you have to also remember that in 2018 and 2019 in particular, crypto really had a bad rap. Like, when you look at today, when people talk about the crypto winter, there's people obviously have sort of macro concerns, but for the most part, everyone understands Bitcoin is here to stay, Ethereum is real, non-fungible tokens, okay, maybe some, there's some projects that obviously aren't great, but generally speaking, Web3 is here to stay. There's almost no question anymore that this is an exciting space, both for investors and professionals alike, right? Every brand in the world has a metaverse strategy at this point. Everyone's thinking about how to enter that space, right? It's very different, right? But, 4 years ago, it had, unfortunately, this reputation of, the home for scammers and for all these things that, had a lot of people concerned. So, the ASX wasn't the only place in the world that was concerned around it. But we were very, very prolific in our activity. When we started first encountering non-fungible tokens in late 2017, we went all in on the space and decided to build with blockchain gaming at the forefront. And that's how that developed. So that was, but then also the market itself, when we were a small cap or actually micro cap company, in the early, so just to recap, in late 2017, early 2020, Animoca Brands market cap was sub $5 million. Right, it was a very, very small company.
Crazy.
Yeah, it's crazy. Yeah. But and then so in some ways, looking at Animoca Brands as sort of growth chart and also value, because of course our revenues and everything and bookings has increased substantially too since then, is probably also a macro reflection of the market we're operating in and the kind of player that we have become in the space, right? So in other words, what you're seeing in our growth isn't just us as an individual business. Obviously, we've done well and we're grateful for that. But it's also the fact that we are playing in a market, in a field that generally speaking has seen tremendous growth, right? I mean, if you look at, so it may seem fantastical that we have gone from, 120 odd million to at this point, close to 6 billion, or it depends what the Australian dollar is worth, right? Because we're still pricing AUD. However, when you take a look at, some of the projects we're involved in, such as the Sand token, or such as ApeCoin, or such as other projects that we've been working on, then actually it still pales in comparison from a return ratio, right? So it's all really relative, right? But I think the other thing is that what turned out to be something somewhat of an indirect blessing was that we were able to, at the time of the delisting in 2020, it just happened to be that at the latter half of that year, that's when the whole Web3 blockchain space really started taking off in mainstream, with particularly our area, non-fungible tokens. That's when it started to explode. And the fact that we were no longer listed meant that we didn't have many of the restrictions that the ASX at the time would have imposed on us in addition, which was sort of part of the conversations that they're having because of their unease with the market. I understand that today that's changed, of course, right? But at the time, obviously, that meant we would not have been able to navigate perhaps as quickly, and the growth of our business would have suffered. But it's not all bad, right? Because when you think about us in 2018 and 2019, if we were not listed on the Australian Stock Exchange, we would not have raised the relatively small capital in comparison to as of late in order to help grow that business, right? So if you may remember, in 2018, 2019, you can't raise money for anything blockchain related. Everyone was fleeing the scene.
Right, yeah.
And here we are talking about a less fungible, sort of a non-fungible, less tradable version of what may appear to be the same thing. So obviously, no VC was ready to fund us, or many of the companies we ended funding, like Axie Infinity, or basically OpenSea, and all these companies were raising less than $1 million or less than single-digit millions at very, very low valuations because there was no market for it. So and Australia and Australian investors. So we're grateful to the Australian investors because they evolved and willing to sort of back us at these uncertain times. And if it wasn't for them, then we wouldn't be here today either. So it's I guess it's a little bit of obviously foresight, but also good luck and fortune.
No, I mean it's quite an incredible story. So I like how you kind of normalize it in some way, but it does make sense for sure. And I think even some of the tokens, right, that you could have acquired, I guess, in 2018. I mean, the kind of upside that you get from them is also high. And then there's some amazing stories. I know Australian press once in a while they'll write about these kids who use their pocket money or whatever to buy your stock, and now it's worth right. millions of dollars. I'm not sure if you've seen those stories.
I've seen all those. I mean, people have to remember, like, our last share price was at $4.50. Before delisting, our share price was technically 18 cents, but on the secondary markets was probably trading well below that because of the uncertainty, right? So there wasn't just the fact that our share price was low, it was also the fact that there was the uncertainty premium, and the fact that the risk of being delisted and finally delisted is normally sort of terminal for most companies, right? Which in our case, so ours is an unusual story, and I certainly wouldn't encourage other companies to take that route, just because, right? But it also boils down to one other thing, which is around sort of mission and purpose, right? If for us, it wasn't really a question to sort of drop blockchain and stay listed at that moment in time. Like we had seen the future, and for us, it was just simply not an option. It's different if you were maybe involved in business and you weren't didn't have the same conviction. Then maybe maybe the outcome would be entirely different. But for us, it was very, very clear what we wanted to do anyway. So the outcome, you could say in hindsight, might have been predetermined, but of course we didn't know that at the time.
Amazing. And so you're still raising capital now, right? So I think you raised 120 million this month, or announced that you'd raised the money.
Yeah, so we raised 110 recently, but I mean, basically at the start of the year, we had raised some $360 million at roughly the same valuation. The main messaging around why we're raising money is because if you look at our bookings that we announced in April, it's not that we necessarily need the money. The main thing for us really is that we're looking at it as alliance building. So if you take a look at, for instance, the main investors that joined us in the last round, Boyu, GGV, and Temasek, amongst others, it's very clear that this is alliance building. The amount of money that they put forward for these funds isn't actually, in the scheme of things, significant for them per se, but it's basically about building and forging alliances to push forward basically Web3 blockchain. I mean, for GGV and Boyu, it was their very first Web3 investment. At the start of the year, some of our investors included groups like Soros, for instance, right? Again, it was probably one of their very, very first, if not first, sort of Web3 or certainly blockchain gaming investment. So I think the point for us is that, we're operating in a space where we're affecting people's lives very dramatically. If you look at what happened, for instance, with one of our other portfolios like Axie in the Philippines, And, people are making a living playing basically, Web3 games. It's affecting, in some cases, the political landscape as well, where, like village and mayoral elections are based on whether they are accepting to Web3 and blockchain gaming versus not, for instance, right? It's not that different from, when there's an industrial change and there's basically people lobbying for, what might give them better opportunity or prosperity in a particular region. So for us, that means we need to bring sort of as many alliances as we can into this, who understand that what we're trying to do is a net good. And that's why, sovereign state funds, for instance, are becoming part of the agenda, or big family offices, right? The earliest days of sort of the Web3 growth came mostly from crypto funds, and that's very important. But those same crypto funds are the ones who aren't necessarily, most liked amongst regulators or sort of, nation states who have concerns, not maybe because of where they are today, but maybe because of what might have happened in the past. And so that's one of the reasons, we think of fundraising as alliance building. So it's not that we would be fundraising for more capital per se, it's for how do we enter markets. So for instance, just a few months ago, we had entered another partnership in Japan with Animoca KK, which is basically our Japan subsidiary. And our strategic shareholder that we announced is MUFG, which is the Mitsubishi Group. The Mitsubishi Group is the largest zaibatsu in Japan, multiple times larger than the next one. And not only does that open up basically the Japanese market for us, it opens up IP relationships, and it also opens up much friendlier relationships with, the powers that be, because of the fact that a major group like Mitsubishi Group is giving us their vote of confidence. So that's basically the main reason why we would be continuing to fundraise.
That makes sense from your, from your side. That makes absolute sense. And I guess for them, because I guess there's kind of a sense that people don't always really understand what Animoca Brands is, right? I mean, you guys are prolific. I think you've done more than 300 investments, right?
380.
Right, almost 400, and obviously you're still raising capital. There's a lot going on. Like there's money going in, there's money going out. I guess, I mean, would it be fair to say that you're sort of a holding company, perhaps for the industry? So these like sovereign funds and these state funds, they're looking to sort of get a very, very broad exposure to what's happening, and obviously beyond that, like it's not like you're an S&P 500. There's a selection process here. Like you're looking at, what are the right kind of deals, but essentially you're giving them a sort of broader exposure into the industry versus them picking out actual sort of dApp makers or platforms. Right. Is that kind of a fair thing to say?
Well, I mean, I suppose that's how some people might look at us. That's not how we like to think of ourselves, but it's a fair statement in the sense that because of our positions being as large as it is, right? Really, I think the value of our business derives mostly from our operating capabilities, which is where our income comes from. However, obviously, our investment returns have done quite well, in some cases fairly fantastic. Well, if you think about sort of, the fact that we were early in Dapper Labs, OpenSea, or that we had basically sort of, we own the sandbox, for instance, our involvement in these projects at the very early, so Axie Infinity. All of these are companies that have become unicorns, or in some cases decacorns. But when we entered them, basically were either in the single-digit millions or very, very low, sort of double-digit millions. So obviously, from that perspective, it would look like, we have been great investors. And we continue to do that. But the lens as to why we make these investments didn't come from the fact that we were hoping to make billions of dollars, hoping to do well. But it came from the perspective that we wanted to grow the space, and thus we ourselves would grow as well. The perspective of building in Web3 and the open metaverse is this idea that we can have a shared network effect. But how do you build a shared network effect if you're the only one doing it? It doesn't work, right? So it's a little bit like where we are today with Facebook. So in order to do that, you have to not only distribute and decentralize a participation, you have to distribute and decentralize capital. You have to basically help grow an ecosystem as a whole that then enriches you in the process. For instance, us investing in OpenSea in the early days was a way to facilitate more network effects into the NFTs that we ourselves would sell, such as land and sandbox. And most of the land and sandbox was traded on OpenSea in the beginning. And if it wasn't for OpenSea, Sandbox may not have had the success it's had today in terms of awareness, as an example, right? And so that's really why we made these investments. Our investments, for instance, in guilds, for instance, are similar, right? We were one of the first seed investors in YGG, and today are probably in, possibly over 24 guilds. The reason we make these investments is not because the guilds themselves can provide returns. Sure, they can. but also because they onboard customers into the open metaverse. They train people how to play and earn type of games. And the whole ecosystem grows. And of course, every project that we're building, not just Sandbox or Rev Racing or Phantom Galaxies or Life Beyond or like all these ones, actually end up growing as a result as well. And finally, I think the other thing to think of is that because we think of everything in economic terms, we don't think of ourselves as a business that should be measured by P&L, profit and loss entirely. Rather, we think of ourselves as the kind of economic contribution we make, for which we then obviously take a cutoff. Right. So if you think about even every layer 1, layer 2 blockchain, we should think of them as nation states, where basically, how do you measure Ethereum volume transactions? You can't measure it based on the gas fees. That doesn't make sense. You measure it based on the economic activity, the jobs it's created, the opportunities it's made for countless millions of people and growing. And so from that lens, you basically have to continue to grow and invest in that way. And that's been our philosophy, because unlike other industries, simply by participation in the network, you can enjoy in its growth. And that's, I think, is what we describe as a shared network effect, and why we think it's so game changing, because we also think it has the ability to reform sort of the kind of broken capitalism that we have today.
Makes sense. Well, there's a lot to touch on there. Just quickly, like I want to ask you a couple of things. You mentioned Axie, right?
Yes.
Obviously, like an absolutely incredible success. I think it launched thousands of other projects who saw what happened. Obviously, things have changed a bit, and you mentioned an example in the Philippines of people who are earning sort of $500 plus, $1,000 plus, right, during COVID. Obviously, that's fallen quite a lot. I mean, just quickly on that one, what's your sort of thought? And I guess this feeds back to a question I'm going to ask you about the next 10 years, but where do you see sort of play to earn gaming at the moment? Is it that has the buzz completely gone? Can play to earn gaming come back?
No, of course. I mean, first of all, the common term now is usually play and earn, but either way,
or play to own, or whatever.
Yeah,
there's a lot of different phrases, play and own.
Right? But the main point is that basically that there's financial value in the transactions that you do inside games, visible to the end user if they so choose. So one important thing to understand this, and this is just sort of a context. The gaming industry today is past like a $200 billion sort of business, of which 110, this is the other thing, $110 billion roughly is being spent in growing in advertising, basically, growing these games, through usually app installs and so on. So that's the macro. And the other thing is that most of the revenue comes from the conversion of less than 3%. I think it's about 1.9 to 2 point something percent is the industry average at this point. That means for all of you here who are probably playing games on a regular basis, you ask yourself the question, how many of these games have I actually paid for? And for the vast majority, it will be, I've never paid for these games. So how is it possible that a game company can make money never charging? Well, that's the model. The model is that 98 to 97% never pay anything for the 3% that do. Right, and that's basically one of the magic sort of elements of play and earn, if you will, is that actually it rewards the 97% players who play for free or have a participation to be able to play for free because they contribute to the network effect. Imagine going to Call of Duty and you're the only player on the field. You're not going to pay, right? you need people to shoot, right? So who are the people who shoot? The ones who play for free, who are having fun and enjoyment, but actually in reality they're working. Right? And they're working inside the game, providing the entertainment for the other people to basically, who are willing to pay for that. That's basically what this is. And so the question then becomes, how much is that worth? And when in 2021, when the value increased the way that it did, and remember, the AXS token is still, I think, a $3 billion FTV. So we're not exactly talking about sort of, oh my goodness, it's the end of the world here, right? Right. I mean, it's all relative, sure, of course, right? But people got very excited and started to sort of run ahead of itself in terms of market value, which, by the way, in all capitalist market economies happen to be the same. Whether it's real estate markets overheating, whether it's commodity prices overheating, right? Historically, you do get that element coming through when there is an open market. That doesn't mean that just because real estate prices are overheating in certain national economies, that real estate as a whole is a fad, right? It's a fundamental business. It's just, were the prices right? Probably not. Was the income right? Probably not, in the sense that, people were making, actually at one point in the Philippines, were making significantly more money, like almost multi-years of their annual salaries that they would be working, right? So yes, that's wonderful, but is that sustainable? Probably not, right? I mean, so now they're back to making, basically something maybe more realistic relative to the economic size that that economy provides. That doesn't mean they're not making anything. And also, more importantly, it's a user choice, right? I can still play something, have fun, and if I wish to cash out, I can do so as well.
Right.
But I think that's the thing. And then I go back to the example of the $110+ billion spent in app installs. That money, and that's what's so superior about Web3 games and why we're so bullish about the long-term future, is that's money that's being spent right now entirely into Facebook and Apple and Google and all these platforms who are basically just, extracting from the network. And those companies, how much are they putting back into the very industry, in this case, gaming, that they've made profit from? Almost nothing, right? Now, here the model in Web3 gaming is you're not actually paying Google that money, you're paying your players the money to basically stay and play the game. And maybe you cash out, but the chances of you recontributing back into the gaming ecosystem is far, far higher than a major conglomerate whose sole purpose is to extract value from you. So now, and then the macro. The macro is that there's only millions of players in Web3 gaming. There's 3.4 billion people who play games today and growing in a space of about 5 billion. So somewhere in between the millions to the billions, there's going to be a delta in which there's still going to be growth. So it may be that we're going to hit maturity, in a number of years, maybe 5 or 10 years down the road, when most people are playing Web3 games. But right now, we're at a point where it's like mobile 2011, 2000, or not even, right? So we're going to see just growth just because of that. And that's one of the reasons why we continue to be so bullish, because from our perspective, we haven't even yet scratched the surface.
You guys are very, very bullish. And it's not only you, right? Also the team that you have, I've seen them at events talking about Facebook and Apple. And as you say, like the kind of, I guess, chokehold that these companies have by virtue of sort of, in Apple's case, of basically building the phone, right? And there's various different arguments, and you guys aren't the only one who's making this point. Epic Games obviously very famously going after Apple. But I mean, is it really realistic to believe that companies in the Web3 space can overturn the kind of dominance that sort of Facebook and Apple have in the next 10 years?
I think so. Well, of course I would say that, but the reason why,
of course, but yes, how, right? How's it going to happen? I'm really curious to get your sort of take on this.
So the reason we think that's going to happen is because it's absolutely the better outcome for the end user. So at the end of the day, why are we doing all of this? It doesn't matter whether you're Web 2, Web 1, Web 3 company. You're doing this because what's supposed to be the best outcome for the consumer, or in this case, a customer, or the way we think of it as almost like a player citizen. Either way, the point is that it has to be better for them. And in this case, we're not talking about better in terms of user experience. Now, when you think about Web 1, Web 2, particularly Web 2, everything was centered around user experience because the paradigm was zero value. So in a world where you're competing with, zero cost of playing a game, zero cost of entering social network, zero cost of whatever it is you do in Web 2, the only battle to be fought is based on user experience. How can I make it smoother, faster, easier to enter? And in Web 3, that paradigm has somewhat come in as well, where people are like, well, it has to be a much better user experience in Web 2. How do we do that? I think the short answer is you don't. Like, of course, you have to make a good experience, but the paradigm is user value, right? In other words, if I'm making more value from this one, which by the way, doesn't have to just be monetary value, but just value as an experience, then I will go to that option instead. Look at a place like the Philippines, for instance, where you have millions of people who have been onboarded. They don't have a bank account. Many of them, they don't have a credit card. They are financially excluded. And here they are using a crypto wallet, right? Which completely defeats the argument that, oh, this is so complicated. Try opening a bank account. That's way more complicated. But we have now, it's become a social norm that is acceptable, that is complicated to open a bank account, and we know what to do. We're willing to wait in line. We're willing to bring a passport, our driver's license, and wait for weeks until we get a bank account. Versus in anything that's suddenly on the click of a mouse, we expect, oh, we need to just click on this and get through. However, if you're now playing a game and you can be making even just hundreds of dollars, right, or even just tens of dollars playing the game as an added income, only if you wish to cash out, for instance, what would your perspective be? Would you rather have the inconvenience of opening up, for instance, a Web3 wallet, or potentially have hundreds of dollars over time, and know that the data is yours, right? And this is the point, right? Which is that I think it's a matter of also normalizing the social norms as to what it is that we do today. Buying an iPhone, using the smartphone is not exactly sort of a frictionless experience as well to enter that particular world. And I would argue every person who's playing a new game, how long is that tutorial to train you how to use that game? It's not 10 seconds, right? You know, basically by the end of that tutorial, which will have probably been in some cases, maybe hours, but in many cases, at least 30 minutes, right? You come through having learned a new skill, right? Whether this is how to combat, first-person shooter, you know, role-playing rules, and everything, right? And that's the magic here, which is that actually this is not difficult at all. It's really just retraining. And because it's a better outcome for end users, we think, people will naturally sway to it. One proof point, name me any person, certainly from a majority standpoint, that has gone and explored Web3 despite all its complications and gone in, and then comes out saying, oh my goodness, this is rubbish, I should never go back in there again. Those, I mean, I haven't found anyone, maybe there's a few, but the vast majority of people I know who basically go into that rabbit hole never come out for that very same reason. It is just a better experience and more value generated.
So you think, it sounds like you believe, and I guess based on the investments that you've done, that gaming is going to be the big bridge that's going to get people in for the first time, right?
I think gaming has already been that big bridge, and will continue to do so. We're also really bullish on education, but gaming in particular is just because, you know, there's billions of people who already have an assumption that they should own their virtual goods, and that's why it seems to be such an easy one. In particular, also, I think that Asia as a whole is going to lead that charge, much like Asia led free-to-play, because many people in Asia in the gaming world are very welcoming to it. For instance, in the West, there's quite a few gaming companies who wish to enter that space, but there's been resistance from the players. And I think the resistance from the players, however, comes from a different lens, right? Which is that I think what we're seeing, clearly witnessing in places like the US, is a rising tide of broadly anti-capitalist sentiment. And so NFTs and crypto has been viewed as sort of this capitalist sort of, you know, rich get richer type of tool, which is not a fair statement, but it is the belief at the moment, right? Whereas in Asia, it is viewed as an opportunity. Oh, it's another avenue of capitalism. It's another avenue of growth. And I'm excited about that prospect. And I'm entitled to property rights around this. So you have these two lenses, which I think, again, means that this region could very well lead in this space in the midterm.
Makes sense. Okay. Unfortunately, we're almost out of time, but I do want to ask you one more question, because it's very selfish curiosity here. I read in a lot of press reports that the money that you're raising now is pre-IPO. Do you have any plans to go public? And if so, like any details that you can share?
Well, I can't share any details as to when, but I think it's a foregone conclusion that we do wish to go public, right? We do have, you know, thousands of shareholders on the cap table, not just historically, but also, you know, as a reason that we've added. We also, as part of our mission, you know, how do we drive broad adoption? Well, we have to get into the broader view of the world. And while we may be, you know, more well-known, let's say, in the world of Web3 and blockchain gaming, you know, when it comes to, you know, the sort of the general public, I would say that we're probably still, you know, somewhat of, you know, an anomaly, right? And the mission that we stand for. And the mission that we stand for is what's so important, which is basically that we can have a shared network effect, that we can basically build businesses that, you know, through the constructions of DAO and property rights are essentially co-owned by its very players, or in this case, its very end users. And that to us is really sort of the North Star. And to do that, you know, we need to have, you know, a broader scope, and being a public company, I think, is one way. But of course, when, you know, we can't tell, the markets in itself don't represent an ideal circumstance anyway.
Right. Yeah.
But broadly speaking, you know, it is absolutely fair to say that with the kind of institutional support that we're bringing in, that, you know, it would have to be something that we would want to do, and we do.
Makes sense. Cool. There's many more questions I could have asked you, but unfortunately we're out of time. Yes.
Of course.
Yes, you, Chairman of Animoca Brands. Thank you so much for your time joining me today.
Thank you for having me.